Hey everybody, I am here to talk to you guys today about plural relationships. So today's session is going to be called I Love All of You, How to Navigate Long-Term Plural Relationships. So the overview of the topic today is when the one that you love is actually the many, day-to-day life can become complex to navigate. Whether that's date night or parenthood struggles, plurality impacts the foundations of a relationship, everything from memory to trust, attraction, relatability, communication, even compatibility as a whole. So today I just wanted to share the tips and systems for life and for love that I've learned on my own journey within plural relationships. You may be wondering, who am I to talk to you about this topic? I'm Daisy Albright. I'm trained as a trauma recovery coach, so systems are something that I have a lot of familiarity with externally, but also I am talking to you as a system myself who is also in a long-term relationship. And it's through these experiences, my personal experiences, and also what I've learned from others, that I want to share with you in this talk today. You may have noticed that I say things like I, me, my. I am using I and we kind of interchangeably for myself and my system. This talk has a lot of information from everybody in my system. And I want to say one thing, that when I mention parts, I'm talking about headmates or system members. Parts is not meant to indicate that anyone is not whole, although we do also have fragments and shards. It's more of a way to say they're one piece of an entire system, just like I am part of my relationship, or I am part of my business, or my town, or my country. Parts are just existing within a greater system. Because I understand that plurality and the surrounding topics and circumstances can be a sensitive topic to cover for a lot of people. From the outset, I want to express some of the topics that I intend to cover that may be more sensitive for some people than others. So, because I am going to talk about long-term relationships, I do plan, we will dip our toes into sex and sexuality as a topic, only briefly, because these are important parts of any long-term plural relationship. Not any, rather many long-term plural relationships. And I will also occasionally mention byproducts of being a traumagenic system that are applicable to many plurals who are in that position, and maybe some who aren't as well. I also want to mention that during this talk, for the majority of this talk, as I recount my personal experiences, I am talking about relationships from a plural relationship system. So, two plural systems within a relationship that is largely monogamous. However, I have also been in poly-plural relationships and plural singleton relationships, so myself and a singleton, and I will briefly cover some of the dynamics in those relationships that can be relevant to having a long-term plural relationship as well at the end of this talk. More specifically, the topics that we will cover today include things like identity, what even is identity and how do relationships help to define identity, compatibility and what that can even look like within plural relationship, authenticity and its importance to plural relationships, and as well as the difficulties in authenticity in plural relationships. I'm going to discuss attraction and the ways that that can constantly change and how to navigate some of the intricacies there. I also want to discuss things like memories, because memories form the foundations of a lot of relationships, and a lot of plurals are missing a fair few memories, even in their life today, and that can cause a lot of pain and misunderstandings. So I also want to talk about communication because it can cause misunderstandings, that and a whole host of other things, and communication is absolutely critical to success in plural relationships, as is trust, and trust is a very delicate subject here. And I also want to discuss roles within plural relationships, things like parenting, and also the day-to-day, the logistical things, the chaos that can ensue, and all of the little things that you have to start managing when you live life with somebody, everything from like doctor's appointments to bills, all of that, and also relationship systems and how you can manage those more effectively within a plural system, at least the things that I found that can help handle things more effectively. And then we will delve into, as mentioned previously, some more of the dynamic specific considerations like plural and singleton, plural and poly, plural and plural relationships. So here we go. First, I want to talk about identity because obviously that's kind of one of the foundations of existing as a plural. So for me personally, from the outside, 10K overview of who I am, to a singleton, of course, I look like a pansexual, gender fluid, sadomasochistic, polyamorous switch. And that's true if you take my system as a whole, sort of. But that's how I've always introduced myself to my partners early on. But in reality, I'm not. Not all of me, not all of us. There are people within our system that very much identify with specific sexualities, genders, relationship dynamics, and all of that can become very difficult to navigate. So it's a very personal decision when to express your plurality within your relationship. Some people are in the camp that you should express it, immediately, very early on. Some people know exactly what they're getting into. Some people have systems where specific system members have their own relationships, and some people choose to kind of hang on to this information until they feel more comfortable and trustful within their relationships. I tend to share relatively early on, but rarely from the very outset. So again, I mostly express a very broad range of preferences and of fluidity. And so that kind of brings me in just a moment to our next topic of compatibility. But I want to step back to identity for a second and bring up the fact that identity is in some ways defined by your relationships. And I don't mean that in a codependent kind of way. I mean that in the sense that once you're in a long-term relationship, you begin to take on different roles, different identities within that relationship, and those start to become integrated into your life, whether or not that's, you identify as a mother or a housewife or a breadwinner. Whatever you identify as within your relationship dynamic, within something that you have to have a counterpart in order for that to exist, I want to step back for a minute and talk about how relationships help to define your identity. And I don't mean that in a codependent way. I mean that in the sense that some aspects of identity exist only in a community. You can't be a housewife without a spouse. You can't be a breadwinner without someone to win bread for. And there are a lot of aspects of identity that are like that. Like, you can't be a parent without children, although that's a touchy subject for some people. So it's important to consider what sort of identity expectations a partner might have. So if they were to expect you to be a housewife, is your entire system okay with that? Is there a way to bridge any sort of disagreements on that front. Is that a requirement for a functioning relationship with your partner, or do you have requirements in the same sort of criteria, those communal identity properties? And that's something that you need to look at, in my opinion, from the very outset of a relationship, because when you are already living a life that is being juggled between different identities and the conflicts that can already occur there, throwing in a long-term relationship partner can really add a lot of stress and decision-making pressure. So think about who you want to be, who your system wants to be as a whole, and consider that before and as you step into relationships. And that kind of leads me into our second point here, which is compatibility. So you want your identities and your role structures within your relationship to be compatible, whether or not that those are fluid or not. You want them to be compatible. And so for me, it's important to have a partner who can work with and understand our wildly and vastly differing preferences, because what makes a great night for one of us will make another of us completely shut down. And that can be a really tough path to navigate for somebody who maybe doesn't understand what's occurring, or is maybe not interested or okay with being along for that ride. I've often heard things from relationship partners when communication was not at the top of its game. Things like, I can't do anything right, or last week or last month or last year you told me the exact opposite thing, so that's what I listened to, so that's what I'm doing. Well, those things were in a different context, and those things were from a different person, and I may or may not have any recollection of any of those things, and that does not mean that they are my preferences. So in that sense, it's important to explore compatibility not only as yourself but across the system, if you intend on being in especially a plural relationship, or any plural relationship that is monogamous or largely monogamous. Because when it is, one physical entity and another physical entity, compatibility issues can definitely arise as, life ebbs and flows and identities, stay fluid. Things aren't always going to match up. And it's important to see those things and account for them, and ideally discuss them from the outset with your partner or impending partner. And that brings us to authenticity. Authenticity is a very charged topic, both in relationships and among plurals, and really in society as a whole. We often tout we want authenticity as a society, but then we reward many of the behaviors that are exactly and expressly not that. And although it does seem that socially we are coming around to a more authentic culture, especially as Gen Z, is growing and starting to really feel out their own identities and put themselves out there in the world, authenticity is something that's top of mind for a lot of people right now. And authenticity in a plural relationship is so important, and for many people so difficult. So in a lot of systems, traumagenic and otherwise, but especially in traumagenic systems, masking is just a natural part of being plural. It was a survival mechanism. You tend to present cohesively. You tend to, when possible, express the same sorts of viewpoints and preferences and mannerisms and ideas, and that sort of cohesive exterior frequently isn't really authentic, because there's a lot of waves happening underneath the surface. So being able to put those waves out into the open can go a really, really, really long way in your relationships and helping your partner, plural or otherwise, understand who you are and what you need and what sorts of preferences you have, instead of trying to build their own idea of what a system looks like within you and what preferences belong in what, quadrants or whatever. But that's very frequently easier said than done. So when it comes to being authentic, starting small can be a big help. For us, starting small usually means things like approaching specific ideas and relationship dynamics via text, whether that's like SMS or a Google Doc, just being able to get out our thoughts and say, hey, this is what's going on with me. I understand that we've been over here, but now we're not. Now we're over here. Everything's different. I don't resonate with anything that's happening right now. I'm starting to feel very uncomfortable. And admittedly, it doesn't always come out exactly like that, but those are the concepts that are expressed, and usually, just even hinting at those sorts of topics in a like a textual sense that's more easy to, I guess, pair out your thoughts and then send it forward, makes it easier to get the ball rolling, at least with relationship partners who have some understanding of what plurality is and what systems look like. And especially in plural relationships, being able to be authentic and see where those alignments happen and sometimes where they don't happen can be a game changer in terms of happiness and joyfully being able to connect with your partner rather than feeling trapped within an identity, as so many plurals in their day-to-day life often experience. And so I mentioned with conversations about authenticity within long-term plural relationships that sometimes those don't line up. If you're authentic and your partner is authentic and you're a plural and perhaps your partner is plural also, not all members of all systems are always going to be head over heels for one another. And that's okay. In my relationship, we tend to kind of feed off of one another's energy, and compatible mates tend to kind of cluster in daily life, but absolutely not always. Sometimes it's, people who could be at each other's throats 24/7, who have absolutely no attraction to one another, and that can cause problems. It poses problems in our life, and that can cause a lot of grief and a lot of hurt. So it's important to communicate about those attractions, and especially to be able to speak up when it isn't present. And that's something that also can be very difficult for traumagenic systems, because we tend to just accept and go with the flow of whatever it is that's occurring at the time. And especially if it is considered a preference or a pleasure to somebody within the system, even if that somebody is not us, sometimes we just kind of accept it and make our way to the other side, because that's what many systems were trained to do. That's what many systems were born of. But being open and honest with your partner, being able to feel each other out on that front is critical. So if you can implement systems that allow you to feel each other out without extreme pressure, that's going to go a long way. Systems like that could include weekly or daily sharing. It could include things like a text message system, or in my relationship, something that my partner developed was a spreadsheet of preferences, so that we can kind of check in with one another and see what ways that we're fluctuating. That's even valid for singleton relationships, but especially in plural relationships where it's not clear, when preferences can change starkly on a dime, to have some sort of system that you can look at, that you can trace back, and see where attractions lie and interests lie, so that you can function together, again, without feeling like you have to hide, or without feeling like you are trapped in an identity or a role that is pre-established with your partner, because that can be a very easy trap to fall into with many plural systems, and again, especially with traumagenic systems. It's also important to be sensitive when you're approaching that topic, and that goes both directions, because it can be really confusing and even hurtful. Even if you know what's happening, even if you know why it's happening, it can still feel confusing and feel hurtful to a partner not knowing what you find attractive or what you enjoy doing, or even that you don't find them attractive or you don't enjoy what you're doing that otherwise you may and have in the past, or maybe even the very recent past, maybe even within the last few minutes. So approach it with sensitivity, because people can have a lot of lasting impacts from what can essentially be a blow to their self-confidence if these sorts of things are approached with a little bit too much force. And that can be very easy to do, and it is still important to voice your needs even if you don't have a sensitive path forward. But when possible, if possible, use kindness. And that brings us to our next point, which is memory, because things often do change moment to moment, and some systems have great mechanisms for sharing and communication, and some don't. And a lot of systems fall somewhere in between, and especially in difficult moments may even lose communication where there once was communication within the system. So with memory in a long-term plural relationship, things can get difficult, very difficult, because when you start missing life's important moments, or it seems as if you're missing life's important moments, that can impact a relationship a lot, and that can cause a lot of pain, because it's memories that tend to form bonds between people. That memories are what give you the cohesion and the trust that this partner has been with you through all of these times, and you know who they are in these scenarios, and you can trust that going forward. But when you don't have those experiences to look back on, even if they've happened, it can feel like your life is disjointed. It can feel like you're not doing anything. It can feel like you don't really know your partner sometimes. So missing memories can really impact everything I've discussed before this point, and frankly everything that comes after this point, because memory is just one of those bonding events between people that makes us feel like we are actually sharing a life with somebody that we actually know. So even though with memory issues people can sometimes feel foreign, and this can be very frustrating, especially if this creature is somebody you call your partner and you feel as if you don't recognize them, or you haven't shared many things with them or anything with them. It can feel very disturbing and ostracizing and even suffocating to feel as if you're not part of your own life. And memory struggles are difficult even on your own as a plural, much less within a relationship. This can include everything from not remembering fights that you've had, big ones, not remembering why you're fighting right now, not understanding why there's tension right now, not remembering what you're talking about right now, and so getting entirely derailed in conversations, not remembering your goals as a couple or what you're working on. And it can even mean losing some of life's bigger moments as far as your memory goes, like your children's first steps. That's something I don't remember. I don't remember my daughter's first steps, and I don't remember hearing her first word. I know she said it. I have a very vague outline sort of her first word, but I have absolutely nothing for her first steps at all. So and for reasons like that, it's really important to have some format of system that you can keep track of the passage of time and the major moments that have occurred. For some people this is a more private venture, like a journal or even a planner. I find that a planner that's dated really helps me, even if I just write down what I did that day, not what I have to do that day. But also things like photos. I know photography can be triggery, I guess, for plurals, just because the way you feel, that you look, and what you see in a photo don't always align. But having that photography, if nothing else but to punctuate time periods and memories and seasons of life, can be very, very, very beneficial to feeling like you have some type of continuity in your life and in your relationship, because you can go back and look at those pictures and you can talk through those moments, and even if you don't remember them, you can sometimes sort of vicariously remember or understand, or at least see in your mind's eye some of the events through your partner's lens, and that can go a long way to soothe some of the difficulties that can otherwise arise due to lack of memories. It's also possible to keep a sort of shared log as a couple. You can do this again in like a journal format, or even in a spreadsheet. I know my partner is all about spreadsheets, which, I mean, it does make it very easy, I guess, to organize things and to access things later. But in any sort of system, it just depends on kind of how you work, how you remember, how you work as a couple, but find some sort of system that works for you to log those memories for the long term, to keep a sense of cohesion with your partner, to realize you have spent a life together, not, occasional blips of moments. In order for any of those systems to work, however, you have to have another not optional part of a plural relationship that's going to be successful, at least as far as I'm concerned, and that's communication. If you don't communicate about what's happening, then there's still a good chance that things will be missing, or you'll have different versions of what's occurred than your partner, and that even just having those things subconsciously, having those different versions, can make difficulties and friction in unexpected ways. But communication is something that, it's all relationships need to work on. Plural, singletons, poly, not poly, it doesn't matter. Everybody needs to work on communication and continuing to communicate with their partner. And in a relationship with a plural, it is frequently more difficult to communicate. Sometimes we have the advantage that certain system members are able to bring a voice to ideas that are otherwise not able to be communicated by other members. That's also not always the case. Not everybody has that benefit. A lot of people don't have that benefit. And another struggle with communication in systems, especially like system and system relationships, is a tendency to cover. Like we talked about earlier, everything is cohesive. I'm here, I've always been here, nothing's changed, no dissociation. Like, this is my cohesive identity, is what most of our brains are trained for, even if that's not our actual reality. But conveying that sort of continuity is a habit. It's a mask. It's a front, which I guess really, generally we would refer to different things as a front, but it is a mask, essentially. And these covers can make it really hard to communicate authentically, to build that trust, to be open with your partner. And it's something that everybody in the relationship has to stay aware of and has to work towards and find ways to call that to attention. And I just want to say that a lot of times in relationships, when you first start calling attention to that, things can get a little rocky, a little chaotic, a little unstable. And I think it's really important that you expect that. I mean, don't doom yourself, of course. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, but I think you should at least be prepared for that, especially if you are in a traumagenic system. Traumagenic systems have a tendency in moments like that to kind of bring up defense mechanisms that have always been there, at least been there, for a while, most likely since childhood. And those defenses were there as protection at a given point. They were there as a survival mechanism. They were helpful, and sometimes in relationships they aren't. Traumagenic systems have a tendency to kind of stir things up, to push people away, to boundary test, to safety test. Sometimes we are known to be aggressive communicators, or we shut down. Some of us fawn. Regardless, there are methods of communication that are not always conducive to happy and successful relationships, but that are integral to our existence and have been integral to our survival. So being able to recognize those things and work with those tendencies, and to develop that sense of safety and comfort as those things arise, will go a really, really, really long way in establishing a stable, long-term plural relationship. In order for that type of communication to exist in the most beneficial and constructive way possible, another component that you really need in a plural relationship is trust. So again, we're going to go back to traumagenic systems here. Traumagenic systems have a distinct tendency, depending on where you are in your healing journey, but most people for a good while have a tendency to distrust our partners inherently, and to look for reasons to distrust our partners, even subconsciously, even if our partners have never done anything, and especially if they ever have done anything to break that trust. But not being able to believe what your partner says, either about your past, or about the memories that you've shared, or their intentions. If you don't believe what they say, then communication becomes more and more difficult, and things like boundary testing and safety testing can become more difficult. And it's not uncommon for partners to fail those tests, to react in ways that the system doesn't necessarily deem as safe or okay. So in that sense, it's important to do everything you can to maintain trust from the outset, and to find relationships wherein trust can be established. Finding relationships with trustworthy people. But in the event that trust is broken, and in most relationships it happens in some form or another at some point or another, giving very serious and focused effort to resolving those trust issues, to communicating about whatever has occurred, to communicating about intentions and ways forward, and trying to reestablish that safety for partners of traumagenic systems, and really with plural systems as a whole, because that there is still some amount of stigma and charge with existing as a plural, and feeling like somebody is on your team, somebody is your partner, is welcomed by most plurals I've ever met, and feeling like you have somebody else who might be against you, who maybe you can't trust, can be very disconcerting. So do everything in your power to maintain trust within a plural relationship. Also, for long-term plural relationships, one thing to consider is the changing roles that occurs over time, and who you are together. And one of the roles that frequently arises in very long-term relationships is the role of parenthood. Obviously not always. I know my journey to that place was very, very, very difficult and filled with heartbreak. But now that I'm here, I'm seeing challenges that I never expected to see. So in a plural relationship, as a parent, it's important to be aware of your strengths and of your limitations, and to ensure your partner is also aware of those things. Having children, especially for traumagenic systems, can be incredibly triggering. There are a lot of situations that arise as a parent that systems may or may not expect coming into parenthood, but that can derail things a lot if you're not expecting them, if you're not prepared for them, if you don't have a support system in place to handle them and process them and come back to where you need to be as a parent, with still having your own experiences, but letting your kids suffer as little as possible for whatever triggers that may arise for you. So things that are also important to consider in parenthood as a plural and with a partner are things like, again, memories. It can really hurt a kid's feelings when you say, hey, we're going to play this game tomorrow, we're going to go to the park tomorrow, and then tomorrow comes and you have no recollection of that. And that can really hurt. I mean, that can hurt anybody, but especially a child who's only now developing, trust and developing those sorts of understandings of how relationships function. Knowing if and when you have struggles on the memory front and how to account for them is important to staying healthy in that role. And for older kids, and this is not going to be something that everybody's going to do or would feel comfortable with doing, but at least in some long-term plural relationships, systems may consider discussing with slightly older children generally, what actually occurs when a parent doesn't remember things, or when a parent is acting or responding differently than normal or differently than they expect, because children kind of rely on consistency and routine, and those are both things that can be very difficult to maintain for a plural, and especially to maintain within a plural relationship, even more so if it's a plural relationship. So you have to have some sorts of systems in place to account for any weaknesses or differences that you know of in yourself, and you have to have systems in place to develop some formats of routine, even if you don't live a super routine life, to have some formats of reliability and routines for your kids. For me, that's all about systems. Systems for systems. There are the logistical systems, the day-to-day. You're in a long-term relationship, you have all of the life things to deal with. You have doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, kids' soccer games and meetings and work and grocery shopping and bills and all of the things that have to be managed and remembered and shared with a partner. So for me, and in my relationship, things like shared Google calendars, where you put in literally everything that you need to do that's time sensitive, that your partner needs to be aware of as it comes up, and then sharing that with your partner so you can each see, okay, this time block is already blocked off, we have a doctor's appointment then. Being able to share those logistical aspects, knowing who pays the bills, when the bills are due, so things don't slip through the cracks, knowing when groceries need to happen or when paydays happen. Having combined systems in your relationship can go a long way to reduce friction on those fronts. I also maintain a personal planner where I can put all of my upcoming events, where I can also log thoughts, where I can log things that I have done, things that I need to do, things that I want to do or want to buy or need to buy. That again, like we talked about earlier, helps punctuate time for me. That lets me flip back and be like, okay, this is what was happening. And for me, I can kind of tell via how things are decorated or written, or if they're decorated, or if it's written, sort of who or what has been doing what during what time period. So having some form of outlet that can be personal to you can also kind of help contain some of the logistical chaos and capture some of the things that might otherwise get lost. You know, whether that's ideas or events or whatever. Having some sort of personal log can be a good way to make sure you hang on to those things. As for those sorts of things that partners need to share, like tasks, but that aren't necessarily like, here's our bill date every month, here's our doctor's appointment date, but things like fix the gutters and, you know, clean off the porch, clean out the fridge, whatever, those sorts of tasks, it's very relevant to have some form of system also. For me, for us, we tend to use spreadsheets, like to track home repair projects. Sometimes we lose those spreadsheets, but we do keep spreadsheets and add projects as we can remember to do so, and occasionally put things like links to products that we need or budgets for those things, how much it's going to cost over time as we can, into those spreadsheets that we can then also share with our partner. And in the shorter term, because especially in my relationship, we've struggled a lot with knowing what needs to be done, but not knowing what needs to be done in the moment. So a system that we are implementing now is filled with sticky notes. There are sticky notes on the door frame of every single room in our house that says, when you walk in here, here are the things that need to get done in this place. Whether that's put up a shelf or take out the trash or whatever, you can clearly see what needs to be done in that space. And then we keep one wall where things that are completed, the sticky notes just move to that location. And so you get to kind of see some progress, and you get to see that you are doing something, that you're making a difference, that things are happening even when you can't necessarily remember it. And that can be really good for morale and motivation, and that's something we're still working on implementing in a real kind of way, and like integrating into our life. Additionally, in that system, leaving information about what needs to happen as you walk out the door. Like, do the library books need to go back? Do you need to return an item? Do you need to pick something up at the hardware store? Having sticky notes on the door, grab and go, great. Same things for a grocery list. We keep a dry erase board on the fridge, and that dry erase board also has a secondary benefit in that it holds a sheet with a list of emotions. And because emotions can be very difficult to discuss in plural systems, we can use a dry erase marker and just mark, you know, I'm feeling these things. We just put a check mark beside those things that we're feeling, and sometimes that makes it a little easier to share, a little less friction. So kind of this whole system is meant to be logistical, but also emotional and motivational, and meant to facilitate the relationship things, not just the getting things done things. The same thing can apply for the dishwasher. Is it clean? Is it dirty? Does it need to be loaded? And the laundry and the leftovers in the fridge, if you're the type to keep that sort of thing. Having a log of, I put this in here, here's what's in there, because again, memory issues for most of us can also reduce a lot of friction and a lot of waste. And those are just sort of the everyday things that you have to consider when you are in that sort of relationship. As far as containing the chaos in a relationship sense and less of a logistical sense, going back to text communication, so you can go back and read and have logs and see what's been occurring between you and what resolutions you've found, and knowing what you're working towards, and also being able to get out your thoughts without interruption and without forgetting them, can help, whether that's SMS or Google Docs or what have you. A piece of notebook paper, doesn't really matter. And that is true on both the long-term scale and in conversations. So it can be very easy to forget what you are talking about mid-conversation when you're in plural relationships, and especially in plural relationships. So kind of keeping just a mind map of here's where we are, here's the leaps that we've taken in a conversation, so you don't just like, what were we talking about, and then whatever constructive input that you've had thus far ends up just kind of being lost to the other. So that's one that I haven't fully succeeded in implementing so far, but in the times that we have implemented it has been definitely beneficial. Keeping a log of your goals as a couple and steps that you might be taking to get there. And I would definitely limit those steps, maybe 1 to 3 things that you're working on, and your next actions can help you keep making progress, can help you get closer, can help you facilitate some of the we have done these things together feelings, that we have grown together, we have lived a life together sorts of feelings. And having that log just means that you get to remember it and you get to track it, and limiting it makes it not so overwhelming, kind of reduces the barriers to entry, just like any other form of goal setting, just here in a relationship sense, and in a place and in a system that is shared with your partner. Google Sheets, a notebook, doesn't really matter whatever your preference is on that front, just a system that is consistent, that you and your partner can consistently refer back to. Other traits to facilitate in plural relationships, and these are going to be very personal things and can be grown in a variety of ways, augmented in a variety of ways, focused on in a variety of ways, are things like flexibility. A lot of plurals have a tendency to want to control things, because a lot of plurals, especially traumagenic plurals, did not have that control as a child. But in a relationship, having that flexibility will go a long way to maintaining peace and joy. That doesn't mean just let your needs be stomped on. That doesn't mean anything of the sort. It's just knowing that flexibility is going to have to be there, because things aren't going to go exactly the way that the experts, the relationship experts in the books and on Google and whatever say things are going to go, because things are just going to get lost in the sauce in a plural relationship, and that's just part of it. It doesn't matter how many systems you have, in my opinion, things are going to get lost along the way. And so knowing that it's okay to slow down and to change plans, even when that seems excruciating, and I know for many of us it does, being able to expect that in a long-term sense can really help things stay solid, and can help your mindset stay positive, stay engaged in your relationship, because you don't feel as if the control is being yanked from you. It's a given expectation. And for that, you have to have very clear boundaries and ways to enforce them, and that requires a lot of introspection for anybody, and especially for plurals, because those boundaries are not necessarily the same for each system member. And also because we exist in a system as a unit, boundaries can be difficult, not only because in traumagenic systems usually our more inherent boundaries have been crossed, and generally crossed frequently as children, so we've kind of learned boundaries differently than a lot of people might have. That sense of where do I end and where do you begin can be very unclear, because we are used to being fully enmeshed with other people, the people in our systems. Like, we share lives, we share thoughts, we share everything in some sense or another, usually with at least part of our system members. Even if everybody doesn't share everything, enmeshment is usually just part of it, and that comfort with enmeshment can not only lead us to sometimes not so healthy relationships and sometimes codependent relationships, even in otherwise healthy relationships, it can make boundary setting very difficult, very unclear about how to go about it, especially because a lot of traumagenic systems who haven't been in, or even non-traumagenic systems that haven't been in long-term relationships and haven't had to set boundaries may not know how to. That's not something they teach you in school. So in that sense, focusing on ways to develop boundaries, to practice ways of enforcing your boundaries, healthy ways to enforce your boundaries, and just giving the weight to that it needs, will save you a lot of headaches in a long-term plural relationship. And in my experience, plural relationships tend to desire a deeper degree of enmeshment in their relationships, and sometimes lower barriers with their boundaries, I guess. But regardless of those things, everybody has boundaries somewhere within them at a certain point. Even if you want to give a lot further than you imagine a lot of people do, there's still a boundary for most people that they do want to keep. And if you're not practiced in being able to communicate that and being able to enforce that can cause a lot of distrust and hurt in your relationships. There are a lot of resources on boundary setting, even for people who have experienced trauma. There are journals and books and YouTube videos. I mean, there are a lot of people who have made a lot of great information on boundaries and boundary setting. So taking some time to explore those things, and ideally even explore those things with a partner, and then have some real discussions once you've had some time to process, and from both parties' end, discussing boundaries and what they mean, and the types of boundaries and the extent of boundaries that you want to keep within your relationship is an ideal scenario to kind of setting yourself up for success with pretty much all of the other concepts that we've discussed, with openness, with authenticity, with trust, with communication, with attraction, even with all of these things. Boundaries play a substantial role, and having compatible boundaries is, as far as I can tell, completely critical to success in a plural relationship and in any relationship. Other than that, patience and being forgiving, and just the understanding that things are going to arise, things that your friends might not have in their relationships if they have singleton relationships, that there are going to be issues that your friends don't necessarily understand in any real way. Having those, I guess, an acceptance that those types of issues will arise simply by virtue of being a plural system, and being in a relationship, can help you find some peace, and it can also potentially prompt you to find communities, a community of like-minded people who maybe do experience the same types of things that you do, and generate some support that way, because it's not always as easy for problems that arise in a plural relationship for you to just go down to the local whatever and chit-chat somebody and then be like, oh yeah, I totally get it. And there are plenty of things that are that, like, please, by all means, there are so many things that are just, they're blanket statement relationship things, that definitely you can go connect with, relate to people about and with. But there are some plural specific things that it's nice to have people who get it. Especially if you're in a relationship with a singleton, but even if you're in a relationship with a plural, that can stir its own host of issues. And that kind of leads me into our next point. And that's dynamic specifics. And like I said, I have been in multiple versions of this sort of relationship as a plural. So I've been in plural singleton relationships, and I have been in plural relationships, and I have been in polyplural relationships wherein different system members have their own partners, and each of these things come with their own challenges, as do monogamous, non-monogamous, etc. Non-plural relationships, plurality can add some extra layers of complexity to these sorts of relationship dynamics. In a plural singleton relationship, you have to consider how specifically that is set up. Is it one member of the system in a long-term relationship with the partner, the singleton partner, and everybody else is just along for the ride? Or is it that the entire system is in the relationship? Is there anybody who does not want to be in the relationship? And what sorts of issues can arise from that? Because there's not always an agreement, and especially when you're making like a long-term life choice, like marriage or becoming a parent, really just even serious long-term relationships, moving in together, any of the things that come with that, not everybody's in agreement, and that can cause major inner turmoil, and those decisions can have impacts that just continue on throughout the course of your life. So having means and methods to communicate these possibilities with a singleton partner is so important, because some of these concepts, if you're a plural and you're talking to a plural, like, okay, yeah, it just makes sense, like this is how it is, this is how we exist, this is what life looks like. But to a singleton, this can be mind-boggling, like confusing. It doesn't, they really don't have any foundation to grasp it. Most singletons, obviously some are very intuitive, but a lot of singletons don't really have a foundation to lay this information on, especially if they're not in any of these types of circles. So having words to explain the things and having ways to test understanding and being able to work through the boundaries clearly, with having that form of relationship, like, is anything off limits, for example? Is anybody off limits? Are there things that specific people are not interested in, or specific people are very interested in? All of the things that we've kind of discussed so far, just I guess breaking it down further in a way that a singleton can integrate into their reality until they kind of become more used to, more accustomed to the way that your brain, your system functions. And it can just as well, it can be kind of confusing once you're deep in a relationship, kind of confusing how a singleton functions in daily life too, if you're plural. And in that sense, the reality is not necessarily matching up, and both sides not necessarily understanding exactly what the other is experiencing. Plural poly relationships can get super complicated, because from a singleton standpoint, the initial thought in one sense is that you yourself as a system, you are poly, you have multiple partners, and it can be difficult, to say the least, for a singleton to see and accept that you may not. Your system, if taken as a whole, might have different partners, but you yourself as a system member may be completely monogamous with your partner, completely committed to your partner, whereas another system mate may be in like a full poly relationship, or they may even be committed and monogamous with somebody else. There may be even different gender preferences and different everything in this realm can be different, and you can have more than one partner as an individual. You can have more than one partner as a system. You can each individually have a single partner and be within a system. And trying to convey that type of concept, which seems kind of straightforward sometimes if you exist as a system, like, hey, you know, it's just me and you, but sometimes my body, like, it's not just me and you. That makes sense. That doesn't, there's not necessarily any crossover there for you, but trying to wrap their head around, a singleton trying to wrap their head around that concept that there's no crossover, that you don't necessarily experience that relationship with that other person, can really work against them in terms of trust and confidence. And this goes back to explaining things about attraction, being authentic, being open, communicating, having, you know, systems and ways to track these things and to share these things, else those sorts of relationships can get very rocky. And in plural relationships, you have all of these issues, and you guys may or may not even know it, just depending. You also have to consider, like, alignment. Like I said, in my relationship, we have a tendency to sort of feed off of one another's energy, and we kind of have partners within our systems, and that's, you know, that's part of why we are together. That's part of why we have been together for so long, is, you know, we're really two systems that have come together and integrated. But that can cause immense conflict. That doesn't mean, like, it doesn't always line up. It doesn't always lock like this. Sometimes it's like the teeth and the gears, they don't line up quite right, and we don't mesh, and we don't make sense to one another. We can't really communicate. We don't share the same preferences, and we may not even like each other at all. So knowing those things, and again, communicate, be authentic, and do everything you can to share beyond the mask if a truly open and intimate relationship is what you're after. And that can be incredibly difficult, so sharing those struggles with one another can do a lot to facilitate a bond in a plural relationship that is just, you know, it's immense, it's weighty, it's heavy. So share those struggles with one another, share solutions with one another, and develop systems that work for you, for your systems for your systems, to make sense to one another and to function with one another, whatever that might mean for you. Make sure that you give priority focus to that, because when you're not on the same page and you're not in alignment, it's easy for, in a plural system, things to fall apart, even if everybody's not in agreement that things should fall apart. And that can be very difficult, and that can be a big source of pain and distrust and memory loss and everything else. So systems for your systems. Find them. And with that, I'm going to close. I think systems are relevant to all systems, no matter what type of relationship you're in, or even if you're just considering being in a relationship, getting into a relationship, and just preparing for what sorts of things you're going to encounter, and determining how to enter a relationship responsibly, and what sorts of things you need to share, and how to connect in some of the ways that we as plurals maybe connect a little differently than singletons do. But, you know, across the board, like, love is love. We may all experience it a little differently, and we may all not understand it the same way, receive it in the same way, or give it in the same way.